to ask a tough question.
Yeah, please do.
So Ibn Patel always talks about how it's just so easy in the context of dialogue about other people's religions to compare your best to the other tradition's worst. And I worry that my question might fall victim to that critique, but I also feel as though much can be learned from asking about the tough things in everybody's tradition.
Yes.
When I look at contemporary India today, where the vast majority of Hindus in the world live, first of all, I see a country that's booming and prospering and doing phenomenally, but there are still significant religious tensions that exist there. How do you account for their presence? What do you think caused them? Do you think it's a perversion of religion? Do you think it's left over from colonialism?
Very good question. And I write a lot on this also, so I'll share with you my ideas. Yeah, I as a dharmic person find the current socio-political condition in India to be unsatisfactory. And I do not consider this to be a sort of, nor do I consider the trend of materialism and imitating the West to be dharmic necessarily. Dharma is not go back in time either. It is not that you run away and live in some cave and don't have medical progress and technological progress. All that is fine. Progressiveness, science, and inquiry is all fine. But what I find troubling is there is a tendency to just mimic the Western culture because it will get you jobs, it will get you into famous journals you can write better, you will get probably a book deal with a great publisher, you get on television easier, so you can become more successful by abandoning or making private your faith and becoming more sort of secularized. Because the West has controlled the definition of what is secular. And the dharmic equivalent would be pluralism, not negating the faith, but having lots of faiths. That would be the dharmic equivalent. So there is a dharmic term for that, which I also write about, which is a dharmic response to secularism. But India didn't follow that path. India likes to call itself a secular democracy, rather than a pluralistic democracy, which would have been better, in my opinion. What happened to India is that there was Gandhi, who wanted India to go back to Dharma. He used Sanskrit non-translatables in his life. He lived differently. His life, his dress, language, style was different. He was very audacious. And he said, I respect the English, but they shouldn't impose on us. And by the same token, I don't impose and want the English to become like us either. So we are how we are, and we should respect each other. But I hold my ground firmly. Now, he wanted a return to Indian society after independence that would be dharmic, villages would be empowered, it would not be top-heavy, not be top-down, centrally governed, because Indian society was very decentralized, and local villages having their own governance and their own, bottom-up kind of society. And bottom-up goes very well with this idea of dharma, where each individual has his own dharma. So a few people who get together who have had similar experiences might form a sangha, but it is not some church headquarters bringing it down on us. It is
or centralized government.
Or centralized government. So it is neither centralized religion nor centralized government, but very decentralized. Gandhi had this idea. Now, Nehru, who prevailed, was trained in Oxford, a very Eurocentric kind of person. In John Kenneth Galbraith's writings, he was the former ambassador to India and a great Harvard economist. He knew Nehru very well in the 60s. In one of his writings, he says that Nehru considered himself to be the last Englishman to rule India. They were so proud of being English. He had this great complex of India. So the system of governance became secular democracy rather than pluralistic. It became high industry imported from the Soviet Union. A lot of these central 5-year plans. He wanted India in a few decades to kind of have this European-style industrial revolution. But builds are not entrepreneurship. Indians are very good entrepreneurs, extremely good entrepreneurs, because that's something bottom-up. That's something decentralized. People self-organize little groups, and they become, big groups. And Indians are very difficult to manage. I used to be in the corporate world, very difficult to manage and control in large numbers. Westerners are much more compliant. Westerners will fall in place. If you can order them, you can organize them, and Indians will all do their own thing. Everybody will do their own thing and become ultra-creative and almost anarchical. But that's the character of that sort of a society. So India lost its soul, if you will, in the Nehru versus Gandhi fight over India's soul, Nehru won. Gandhi was very old, he died. So it's a Nehruvian idea of India that started building the foundation of India. So what has happened specifically in India is that religious conflict, now you talk about violence and conflict. The violence and conflict in India has got multiple causes, and this the media doesn't analyze properly. They like to blame somebody because it's easy to do. But the many causes are the parliamentary system of representation, rather than a presidential election system where you directly elect the president. The parliamentary system has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that even a little group can have 1 or 2 parliamentary members. You know, if you are 2% of the vote, you might get 2 or 3 members in there. So for example, in this country, if somebody were, if there were a parliamentary system, then, some team in the group may get one congressman of theirs.
And the whole country elects then a certain
percentage. All the people who are elected, then all the equivalent of senators and congressmen, then they elect the president. So this gives you diversity of representation. However, the problem of this has been that the exploitation of this in this age of materialism and corruption. Corruption is the real cause of India's problem. Corruption, greed, corruption. It has become profitable to become an elected official. Because if you get elected, for that you need to convince some ethnic group or some religious group or some identity that they are a victim. If they elect you, they'll have a voice. So the victimhood gets you elected. The marketing the victimhood of some people.
Incentivizing victimhood.
Yes, incentivizing victimhood. So when the person gets elected, then he bargains. The bigger the group, the more he has voting power. So if he has a group of 20 members of parliament, then he has a lot of power. If he has only 2, he doesn't have a lot of power. So if he belongs to a block of people, they can then, in order to form the central government, they have some chips they're playing. So they want to be given a position in the cabinet where they can make billions of dollars. It's really a corruption-driven system. And now in the last 6 months, a huge hue and cry in India over fighting against corruption. The Swiss banks, when they disclosed all these secret accounts to the US, gave away the fact that the largest amount of money in secret Swiss accounts that are held, the largest country is India. About $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. The total foreign exchange reserve of India is 300 billion or 400 billion. So 3 or 4 times the national reserve is the value of Swiss accounts of Indians, which is corrupt money. Now, this is because the money they get in bribes and deals, they like to have it parked somewhere else, so it can't be found. So the politicians are in it, the business people are in it, the media people are in it, some religious people are in it. So basically you have a very corrupt society. This is a result of greed and materialism gone haywire, not a dharmic way of life. And so when people are in a rush to catch up with somebody, they get into these kind of things. This is the problem I think that's happening. And as long as there's corruption, there is incentives to create little fiefdoms, make them fight, make them clash. So if I want to go to a community and start some fight, then what will happen is one side will be on my side, one of those people, the other people will be hating me, I polarize them, and this way I may get enough votes to get something.
So everybody wins, unfortunately,
short term
when there's tension.
Short term. Except the people who are getting killed.
Obviously, yeah.
They're pawns, they're being used. So I think to understand the origins of religious violence in India, you have to understand secular democracy, which doesn't respect pluralism, which respects absence of religiosity and religious identity, creates a vacuum of religious identity and religious leadership, and so irresponsible forces come and take over. And combined with rampant materialism and a rush to westernize creates corruption. And when you mix these up, you have a society where the term vote bank in India is a term politically used. Vote bank means that you as a politician have a group of people that are your vote bank. So you can go and play that vote bank when you're sitting and negotiating with somebody. You can say such and such group of people in such and such numbers living in these places are my vote bank. And if you have a larger vote bank than I have, then I have to consider you to be a more powerful guy. So vote banking equates with fragmentation, equates with clash after you fragment, because the most intense fragment is the one that's fighting. Then you really intensify them. So these are some of the problems that India is facing, and I do not have necessarily a positive prognosis for India. I don't have that. And also in my assessment of dharma as a world view, I keep that assessment separate from my assessment of India as a group of people.
So there are so many elements going into India as we see it today,
yes,
that it's not necessarily a living manifestation
no,
of those values.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. And therefore the idea, and we are back circle to the original point, that because of this idea of reincarnation and karma, I don't think that this idea, the principles of dharma belong in a geographically contained place. And these are principles that Americans will discover. More and more Americans are getting into yoga. More and more of them are having the Kundalini experience and not allowing someone to say it's satanic or you have to go to a psychiatric hospital. Many people since the 60s, and I'm writing books on this, have had these kinds of experiences through the dharmic system. They've had gurus, they've had all kinds of Buddhist, Hindu experiences. And while the issues of history centrism have not been addressed adequately, the experiences can go only so far. And when they bump into the history-centric identity that the guy is having, he has an inner clash. And either he has to give up the history-centrism and go for this, or he has to let the history-centrism prevail and take control of him and reject all that he's learned or maybe appropriate it and bring it